It's my pleasure tonight to be in conversation with Christian White. I personally loved all of Christian's books, and apart from anything else, for myself as a writer, it's a great opportunity to pick his brain as well and to bring you along for the ride. We've only got an hour tonight, so I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version of his bio, which should be a little bit shorter. Christian is an acclaimed Australian author and screenwriter with credits including the feature film Relic, Netflix Clickbait, and Paramount's Apartment 7. His first novel, The Nowhere Child, and his follow-up novels, The Wife and the Widow, Wild Place and The Ledge, were all bestsellers. Nowhere Child was one of Australia's best-selling debut novels of all time, with rights sold into 17 territories and a major screen deal. Would you please welcome Christian White?
Thank you.
Do you sometimes listen to that bio as it's being read out and just shake your head and think, is this actually me they're talking about?
You used to, in the old days, you'd have to lie about that sort of stuff, you know, or like really stretch the truth. And now I just, now I can't believe, now I just sort of think, I'll just keep saying things you like about me. It's really, really nice.
So, The Nowhere Child, I'm guessing that the turning point for you was when The Nowhere Child won the Victorian Premier's Literary Award for an unpublished manuscript. That must have changed your life.
It completely changed my life in sort of in the space of a week. You know, suddenly my entire life was changed because I've been trying to be a writer for forever, write full time. You know, The Nowhere Child was my first book in inverted commas. You know, it was actually I think the fifth book I tried to write, and the second one I actually finished, and the first one I thought was anywhere near good enough to show anyone. Like you know, people say now, oh, could you go back and you know those things you wrote before, could you use them? And it's just a really, really hard no, because they were genuinely really bad. You know, as an example, the one before it was it was called Big Jenny, right? And it was about it
hasn't won me with the title, I've got to say.
No. Well, it's such a dumb name for that. But and I came up with the name because it was about this big, and mind you, this is tens of thousands of words. A long time I spent on this terrible thing. It was about this alien slug that came to Earth, and the town, it becomes a town sort of mascot, and they name it Big Jenny, but I thought they named it Big Jenny because I thought, and it was sort of a joke in the book, it was because I thought the lyrics to, what's Beyonce, who was Destiny's Child, was Beyonce and Destiny's Child, it was a Destiny's Child song, I thought the lyrics were, I don't think you're ready for Big Jenny. And so I thought, that'd be a funny thing if they named that after the song, and they're not even the lyrics. And the one before that was even worse. I was trying to do it. I was trying to get into this world for a very long time. And actually, when I got published, I'd sort of shifted gears a little bit. So when I was a bit younger, I was in my 20s, and I thought, I really wanted to be a best-selling author, and I hit 30, and I really still wanted it, but something happened where I guess I was scared of failing, and I think that's why I spent so long not showing anyone anything. But it was sort of more complicated than that. I thought if I try and fail, then I can't write anymore, which is the mental gymnastics, the way we torture ourselves is terrible. And that was a scary thing for me, because I thought, I don't know if I can give up. For me, and I'm sure it's the same for you, but writing for me is this sort of obsessive joy. It's my favourite thing, and I love it so much. And to the point where I'm obsessed with structure, story structure. And whenever we're watching a film at home, I am so good at, I can just knowing what, judging from the plot, I can pause it at the exact midpoint within 3 or 4 minutes, and I do it every time. And then I look to my wife and go, huh? And then she just says, it's a completely pointless skill. Can we just watch the frickin' thing? What are you doing? So I'd had this, the idea of of giving that up if I tried. I sort of connected those two things in my head, and then I had this weird kind of vision. I don't even, and not in a paranormal way. You know, sometimes sometimes I just get little films in my head, and I had this really weird vision where I was 94 or 95 years old, and I was dead. I died, and my grandkids were cleaning out my assisted living unit, you know, and they'd hired a dumpster, you know, they're getting through it all. Anyway, they opened a little drawer like this. I don't know why. I'm being very specific. I made this up, but I could see it very clearly. They opened this little drawer like this, and there was this big pile of cobwebby, dusty, unpublished manuscripts, you know. And I thought, okay, if that's my fate, what a cool thing. So I thought, if I try and fail, I'll just keep writing. It's no big deal. And so I did try. And one of the first things I did was enter the VPLAs, the Victorian Premier's Award for an unpublished manuscript. The hour's done now because of that title. The award is so long to say. And it really did. It changed my life. Between the shortlist being announced and the winner being announced, and I was lucky enough to win that year, there'd been a bidding war, and I'd had a publishing deal, and my entire life was changed. And I thought, wow, I can just do this every day, which is this thing I'd been sort of, you know, I'd been doing it I'd been working casual jobs for 20 years, you know, and I'd be writing at work or after hours and on the weekends, and suddenly I realised, oh, I can just do this thing.
It takes a long time to be an overnight success, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah, when the book came out, it's like, overnight success, Christian Wiles. Oh man, that was a long night. That's like the book. But yeah, and I remember when I got my it all happened very, very quickly, but I remember I got my what was the first offer, and that point I thought, oh my God, I can pay off my credit card, it's going to be amazing. And I was all happening, I was in London, which makes me sound like a very I just popped over to London,
sophisticated.
But it was the 1 3-week period I left, you know, because I didn't think at all I was going to be on the shortlist or anything. So the time difference was weird. But I remember emailing back my mum and dad saying, you know, this thing's happened and I've got this offer. And all in caps, my mum sent back, you've got to take it right now. They're going to take it off the table. They're going to, you know, it's just like, and I was sweating and panicked. And then, and thank God I didn't, because then there was this bidding war. And I remember when I got the call, that was the offer, that this sort of life-changing call, it was really loud, so I had to duck into this little alleyway. And you know those alleyways where you think, I hope that's dog pee. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and you know it's probably a human. It's that real human pee smell, and that detail has nothing to do with the story, by the way. I don't know. And I was this close to sort of a brick wall, and I had this conversation. And when I heard the offer, I burst into tears, because I knew in that moment everything was about to change. And I sort of looked to my left, and there was a garbage man over here, and we exchanged a look like that. He looked away, and he must have thought I was just getting dumped or sent some terrible news, but no, it was good news. I realised that was just one question. I promised I'll be a bit more. That's fine. I'll be a bit more concise,
because I've got another 30. Yeah. So
settle in, lock the doors. We're going to be here all night.
Question I did want to ask you is that life-changing event happened to you. I'm not trying to age you too much, but I'm thinking you were maybe 36, 37.
Yeah, I was 37 when
37.
When I got that, and I'm 44 now. 43.
How do you think you would have coped with that? Had that happened when you were 22, 23? What would have been different?
God, it's such a good question. You know, I think I'm glad I'm glad it happened the way it happened, because I think I don't know why I wouldn't have become a monster or anything, but I do know that being a little bit older and having a bit of life experience and knowing what regular life is like, you really appreciate it. And we were having this conversation in the green room, but when I have an 8-year-old daughter, and when you have a kid, your entire perspective changes, and they've got this way of keeping you grounded and on track. So I'm very glad it happened. Yeah, and also it would have probably been Big Jenny, and I would have been locked into writing weird sci-fis.
You're interesting in that you haven't just written novels. You've moved between screenwriting, and writing novels and other writing projects as well. I'm sure you've been asked the question a lot about what that screenwriting brings to your novels, but I'm not going to ask you that. I'm going to reverse that. When you go into a writer's room, where you're working collaboratively with other writers on a screenplay, what do you take in as a novelist that they don't have?
That is good, because you're right. Usually I get the reverse question. It's what can screenwriting do for novel writing? I think that I don't know if this is a satisfying answer or not, because I've never been asked this question. But I think going in writing the sort of novels I do, I have and increasingly I have a really better understanding of. I've started to think about readers as being complicit in the storytelling, right? So, and I think this is something that I've taken over to film. But whereas when you're doing film and TV, when you're watching it, it's a sort of a passive form of entertainment, because even if it's twisty and turny, it's all done for you, and you're just looking at this thing. When you're reading, it's a very, very active form of entertainment, because you're doing so much yourself. I'll say John has a beard, and then the reader will do everything else, and the reader will make certain assumptions and all that. And I think about that more and more and more, and then I think I bring that to film and TV. I think it's all about giving them a little bit less, and I think so much of what I do is cut back. So I think you just need to give the audience, just enough. And I guess that, to be fair, that it feeds both ways, I think. But because on the other side, I think that when you're writing a script, you have to earn every single word, not even dialogue, every single bit, every scene, because it's all money. And if I write a scene where there's a woman on a bus looking out the window, contemplatively, and it's something else better happen. Otherwise, that scene's getting cut, because that's going to be half a day, and there's going to be extras and all of that sort of stuff. So you kind of learn to really, really be economic, and then I sort of feed that back into novel writing. It's a good relationship, those two. Yeah, they sort of feed into one another.
I know you were in the writer's room for the Netflix adaptation of Jane Harper's The Survivors. Yep. I've got a question to ask. Jane Harper is a peer, so you are part of that writer's room with someone who I'm sure you've met and who is a peer of yours on the writing scene. Did that put any more pressure on you, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, and it's weird, because I actually don't think of her as a peer. I think of her as this sort of superior, trailblazing, amazing author, because I really... she won the VPLAs with The Dry, and it launched her career. And that is the entire reason I entered that competition and all of that. So I really felt... And I feel like also there's always been these amazing crime writers in Australia, but I feel like since The Dry, she kind of catapulted it onto the international scene. All of a sudden, it opened up the audience, overseas and also here. So I really think that I think we all owe her, me and and the Chris Hammers and all of that, and I think we all owe her a lot for opening that up. So it was a lot of pressure, and I remember for a while I wrote an episode of it, and for a while we weren't allowed to tell anyone, but we were doing a panel together, and I said, "Oh, can I? It's going to be weird if I don't say anything." And so I said, "Oh, I'm writing an episode. I'm doing an episode of The Survivors." And she's amazing. She's wonderful. And she said, "Oh," and I thought, "Oh, Jesus!" And then that was really that was bad. But then when we're in the room, it was such a and Tony Ayres, who I worked with on Clickbait, he was the showrunner of that, and we were so. We always look back to the material, and we had to generate a lot. Suddenly, you've got to make a TV show, and out of this really, this book that may not have enough in it. So you've got to generate things. But we always went back to the book, and we're always very, very respectful, and I think that really helped, and that made me feel. That took the pressure off a little bit. And before the show came out, she watched all the eps, and she sent out an email saying, "Good job." And then I was like, "Oh, thank God." Yeah. So, and it's a good show. They did it. Yeah. I think Episode 3 is probably the best, easiest. I'd skip the rest if you drop into episode 3, but no, that was
I'll have
that
to
was
go back
cool to
and
work
check
at. Yeah.
episode 3. Let's dive into the book we're talking about tonight, which is The Long Night. I have to confess, I'm a relatively slow reader. I read a lot, but I'm relatively slow. But I flew through this book, and one of the reasons being that it is a page turner. Now, that term is bandied around a lot, but I never ever underestimate the difficulty in writing a page turner. I'm sure you've been working on your pitch because you've been, the book's been out for 3 weeks now. So you're pitching to people here, most of whom probably haven't read the book. Yep. Let's hear it.
When you write crime, you get very good at describing your book without actually telling anyone anything. And I remember with the Ledge, my last book, the first person who asked me, "Oh, what's it about?" I was so caught off guard. I didn't have anything planned, and I was worried about revealing spoilers, so I just told a lie. I just lied to them, and they must have read the book and like, what the hell was he talking about? But with this, I've got good at talking a lot about it without actually saying anything. So prepare yourself. It's about a long night. Believe it or not, I didn't even come up with that title when I sent the manuscript off. It was called Book 5, and a publisher said, "Yeah, it's pretty good, but what about a title change?" And then I sent through a list of very pretentious titles, and they said, "Let's just call it The Long Night." I said, "Yes, definitely." I've had a terrible track record with titles. I wanted to call my first book Decay Theory, which everyone else on the planet agreed was a terrible idea, and the Wild Place I wanted to call Neighborhood Watch, and everyone said it was really boring. But now there's this new book coming out, Neighborhood Watch, by the way, which is really good. And this one, and then The Ledge was The Ledge, but my publisher said, that title's really boring. It'll be a working title. If it comes out with The Ledge, something's gone wrong. And then so anyway, it's about a long night. And it's about the chapters alternate between two women's perspectives. The first is Em, who is this 19-year-old woman who gets kidnapped in the first scene, and then it alternates between her story and Jodie, the mother, who discovers her daughter's kidnapped, and it's essentially these two women trying desperately to reach each other. I didn't want Em's story, this kidnapped victim, to be, she's in a bunker for the whole thing, getting tortured. I didn't want to write that. I don't think people want to read it. So she has a very active. She takes her situation into her own hands, and it's just these women trying desperately to get to each other. And I think there was a couple of seeds. So I first thing, this will make me sound really, really. This is an insight into my twisted inner workings. But when I was writing my first 4 books, I had this image the entire time. I have a collection of images, but there's one consistent image, which was. You know how people cook lobsters? They put them in the pot and they slowly, and then they make that horrific screaming sound when they're bubbling. I wanted my readers to be like a lobster. That lobster, I wanted to put them in the pot and like, oh, you're safe in there, little fella, and it's all good, and then slowly turn it up, and then they're sort of, I guess screaming and flesh. I guess flesh is peeling off their body and all that sort of stuff. But with this one, I wanted to do. I just wanted the water to be boiling straight away. I know the water's going to be boiling in this one. So that's why I think I set it over one night. I thought, okay, if it's set between 7 p.m. and dawn, and the stakes are high enough, then your characters, they can't really think about, bills or relationship problems. And that's a real challenge as a writer, just to kind of keep that tension going. And the other thing that happened is I heard it as a true story. I heard it so years and years and years ago. I listened to a lot of podcasts where people call in and tell about ghosts and these personal experiences. And I heard this story that stuck with me for years and years and years. I did a little digging, and I actually think it's probably more of an urban legend. But I'll explain the story with a lot of pepper on it, the way I told it in the book, which is a bit different from but pretend this was based on a real story. I can't tell you that straight-faced. But I heard this story, and I changed it to be this, where there's a couple driving home late at night after a date, And it's a dark and stormy road, forested kind of road. The windscreen wipers are going back and forth. That real kind of classic horror setup. And all of a sudden, in their high beams, they see a baby crossing the road. And they go, oh my God, there's this baby doing out here in the middle of the night. And they slam on the brakes and they nearly go into the gully and they turn around. And they're thinking, what the hell was that? It was this baby. Was it ejected from a car crash or was it a ghost? You know, what was going on? And anyway, they get up and they get out of the car and they think, oh, we've got to figure this out. They turn on the little torches on their phone and they go up the road, and then with some relief they see, oh, it's not a baby, it's a baby doll. Someone must have dropped a doll out here. Maybe someone was moving, it's no big deal. But then, well, the character in my book, then Em thinks, oh, but I saw it moving. It's definitely moving. So she looks a bit closer, and looped around the doll's neck is this fishing wire, and one end of it goes off into the bushes, and there's just a guy on the other end tugging the doll, and it was this to lure them to a stop, and that's the first chapter of the book, and I thought, okay, that's boiling water, that's where I want to start. So that, and I heard that a million years ago, and it wasn't that story. I made it a bit better, but I was telling people, I was saying, oh, you should do something with telling other authors. That's a cool thing, right? You should do something. I wanted to see it done, and then it wasn't, and then I sort of thought, I'll just do it myself, and that kind of set the pace, I think, for the rest.
Yeah. It is an incredibly fast-paced story. As you said, it basically happens in 12 hours. What are the risks and the benefits of limiting your story so much to that? It's almost happening in real time. Yeah. For the reader. Yeah. So what are the risks and benefits in writing in that way?
I think the benefits are you can just sit in the tension and you've got to go through it. And I think this is also kind of a risk because sometimes you just want to cut away. For example, there's a scene where I was thinking of it, whether it's a spoiler. Not really. So very, very early on in the book, the mother, Jodie, is approached by this man who says, hey, your daughter's kidnapped. And it's sort of a typical kidnap setup. It's, we've kidnapped your daughter, give us this amount of money and we'll give her back, blah, blah, blah. And it would kind of have unfolded okay, except this guy she's seeing comes in and smashes him over the head. And then it's like, oh my God, now we're screwed, And this I think that's chapter 2 or 4 or something, so it's early. But there's a scene where they've just got to get this guy to the van. They've just got to get this guy to a van. And when you just cut to them in the van, you just cut forward, but then slowing it down, it's think, oh no, you get to sit in that tension. You can't cut away, which is a risk because sometimes you want to, but then what's that walk like? And then what happens when the sensor light comes on? And what about the nosy neighbor and all of that sort of stuff? So it's this real chance of slowing down and sitting in those moments longer than you ordinarily would, I think, and just really sitting in that tension. And I do think the benefits outweigh the risks. There was a couple of times where I thought, oh, I'd just love to cut forward, but then I thought, well, hang on, I can't. And then it forced me to think, well, what else can happen? And then you find these really great things that you wouldn't have ordinarily got to. And I think in this weird way, now I'm realizing this, I think I got to know these characters better than any other characters in my other books because I sat with them in this it really intensely. I didn't move away from them. And even though it was a short amount of time, it was this, it's this super traumatic night for both of these women. So I think that it allowed me to kind of really, I guess, when it's like trauma bonding with your characters, I guess.
Yeah, and probably related to that is how do you then find a balance? Because writing a novel like this is finding a balance between character and the plot. And how do you stop it when you're writing over that very short space of time? How do you balance those two? Because you really don't have time on your side to do a huge amount of character development. You've got to have the reader on side with those characters virtually straight away, and then carried forward with them. Yeah, you kind of don't. You get a little bit of time with each character in their sort of status quo, before these multiple inciting incidents happen in their lives, and then the rest, as you say, is like then it's just them under pressure. And I think the process for this book was the same for all of my books, and it's always
always I'll sit down ahead of time and I'll plot it out. I'll come up with what I think is an airtight plot, and I'll come up with a twist and then a couple of kind of cool set pieces and I'm ready to go. And then as soon as I get into onto the page, and you would know this, your characters really do take on a life of their own. So I think that I didn't think of too much about the balance exactly, but what I always do, it's a very frustrating rule, is I always follow the character. And usually what that means is all of that plot I came up with and the great twist and everything, none of that's going to work. But I think it's so important to follow that character, because then even if it's plot heavy, you know them and you care about them, and it always leads you to more interesting places. Tony Ayres describes it as he says you should write each scene from the inside out rather than the outside in, because if you're forcing your plot onto your characters, I think readers can feel that, and I don't think everyone can identify it, but I think that if I'm reading a book, a character's allowed to do something stupid because we all do stupid things, but if they do something purely in service of the plot that's against who they are, you feel it, and that's when you emotionally disconnect, and that's when you're reaching for your phone, and that's what I've always got that in my head. And I hate, there's so much content. I was the idea of, I never want anyone to kind of, okay, I'll look at my phone now, and actually every now and then I'll see. As an author, occasionally you'll see your book in the wild. You see someone reading your book, and I don't know what I'd be interested to see what you do in those situations. Some authors go up and get their photo taken and do all that stuff. I'm just like a creep. I just watch them, and I remember last year I was in Bali and I was in the pool, and a woman was sitting by the pool reading one of my books, and I just swam up like this, just watching. And then at one point she reached for her phone, and then she put the book pages down, and I know myself, had she put it pages up, I would have crept around, dripping, and just kind of looked like this, because that's what I'm always thinking about. And I think those moments are, I think you do, the page turning quality, it does come from the twists, and I like ending scenes as if you go into a commercial break and all of that sort of stuff, but it's really the characters, deep down you don't care about the plot. You do, but you really just invested in those characters.
I want to ask you about your two principal characters, both females. You're a 40-odd-year-old man.
Yep. So I thought, who better to write women?
Yeah, that's right. So what process did you go through to make sure that you got that right?
Well, my first two books were female protagonists as well, and then I did a couple with male protagonists, and I think first early on, very very early in the writing process, I'll get an idea and it'll be the sort of the hook, and then very very quickly after that, I'll see my main character, and it's never a decision, but I just sort of see them from this external place. But that's when usually I'll know what gender they are, what age they are, all of that sort of stuff. And then the rest comes later. When you're on the page, I kind of get to know them. But I think that everyone I just write like a very complicated, flawed human being, and I think that kind of comes through. But I think subconsciously I do borrow a lot from the women in my life. And this book in particular is about this a mother and a daughter, and that kind of secret language that mothers and daughters have, and I, a lot of that is from my older sister and my mum. Mum swears that she doesn't have a favourite, but it's 100% her favourite. It's so clear, and so a lot of it was sort of watching that and kind of stitching some of that into the characters, and then watching my wife and my daughter, and they have a similar thing where it's sort of there's just this bond. So it was less about writing women, I guess. It was more about writing mothers and daughters, and I think and the rest kind of just takes care of itself generally. Yeah.
I did read a quote from you somewhere, and if the question's too hard, you can just refute this, that you never actually said it. But where you said that all my books require me to access personal secret places in myself.
It's very well worded.
Yeah,
I said that.
You actually said that.
What a genius.
Can you reference either this book or something that you have written that would demonstrate that?
Yeah, and I think that I think it largely happens just is part of the process. It's not something I consciously think about. And actually, it was a bit of a surprise to me. It wasn't until I had a bit of a body of work that I looked back and I saw all these recurring themes and all these fears, and I started to think, what does that mean? What am I saying? And so I think a lot of it, I think that, we move through life, and when I'm writing, I picture this sort of this, it's weird, this big bowl of soup, right? And that soup is just all my experiences and the good stuff and the bad stuff and the traumas and all of that sort of stuff. And then when you write, you just kind of put these, you're going to poke holes in the bottom of that bowl, and it comes down onto the page. Very, very strange metaphor, but that's how I feel. And I think, so I think a lot of it, that just happens. But then, with my fourth book, the last book, The Ledge, so much of it was about this group of teenage boys, and I'm glad everyone's sitting down for this. This is going to shock you, but I wasn't a really cool teenager, believe it or not. You look at me and you think, oh, this guy must have been a jock, but no, I was this kind of, gothy, booky kind of kid, and I got bullied and all of that sort of stuff. So when it came time to write that story, originally it wasn't intentional. I just thought I'll write this kind of coming of age, Stand By Me kind of story. And then what happens is you inevitably just plug more and more of yourself into those characters. And that group of kids in that book is just me and my group of friends, really. And then in this most recent book, Jodie, originally she was an art therapist, because I'm interested in that world. But then I thought, no, I don't want to be that together. I want to just be an artist. And this idea of sort of painting your trauma and putting and I've never had, I didn't, she has a traumatic past that kind of comes back to haunt her. I've never had anything as traumatic as her, but I've had many, like we all have. You go through life and you have experiences, and you do kind of think, you kind of use that, and you put it in your book or in a story, and you think it's gone, but then it's not. An example of that is my. I wrote a film called Relic. I co-wrote it with Natalie. Erica James is amazing, but it's a horror movie, but it's basically about what if dementia was a monster, right? And my grandma was going through, my nan, she was going through dementia at the time, and I remember at the time thinking, I was kind of using stuff and putting it into the film, and it felt cathartic and it felt good, and I thought, okay, now it's over there, it's done, and then something happens and it triggers you, and you think, oh, hang on, it's not. I've been carrying it around the whole time, and that's what Jodie's whole journey is, that she has to realize, she hasn't been storing her trauma. She's been carrying it around and not facing it, I guess. Yeah. I actually think I avoided the question, but I was running for it. I was trying.
Yeah, I think there are things subconsciously that we are doing through our writing. Someone pointed out to me at one stage that I'd written 5 books, and they said, "Oh, do you realise that that in every one of your 5 books, everyone's a single parent? No one has 2 parents in their family, and it was always about the loss of a father for some reason." And I hadn't even remotely thought about that. It just recurred through from one book to the next. I
think there's a whole branch of very specific therapy where the therapist reads all your work and goes, "This is what's going on."
That would be a very scary.
It would be awful, wouldn't it?
This is your 5th book. Do you still get the same buzz out of, like, we get sent a box of books first, it's sent to your home, and when you see it in the airport for the first time?
Oh, that's the airport one is the best, isn't it?
Yeah. Is it when you see, if you've worked on a screenplay? Do you get the same buzz of seeing it on the screen as you get of holding a book in your hand? And you get a fraction of that buzz. So
I went had a film come out last year, and I went over the premiered in Austin, and I went and they flew us over there, and we did it, and you get to kind of. People gasp in the right place or laugh in the right places. So you do get to experience that, but film and TV, you're always. I don't mean this in a cynical way. It might sound cynical, but you're a part of a much larger machine. So the thing that you're watching, I might not have thought about this thing I wrote it 3 years ago, and now I'm seeing this thing, and it's really enjoyable. But when you bring out a book, it's collaborative in the sense you're working with editors and publishers and everything. but there's nothing quite. It's yours. It's wholly yours, for better or worse. You can't. If a movie's bad, I can say, yeah, the script was great, but it was the cast and everyone else but me.
Episode 3.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I still get the buzz for sure, and it's the airport for me. Every time I see it at an airport, and actually I've got this new buzz now where. So the last book, so when I had my first 3 books, we didn't have kids, so the maths won't work out. We adopted I've got an 8-year-old, but we adopted her at 3.5, and so books 4 and 5 were just a completely different experience. I kind of saw it through her originally like, what's a big deal, whatever. But I dedicated the 4th book to her, and then I saw it through her. Then it was suddenly, she thought that was cool. And she'd come along to things and sign her name and everything. And suddenly I was seeing it, I was getting that buzz. And I see the way, if I'm at a school, and it happened a couple of days ago, one of her teachers came up and said, I read the book, and I can see the buzz it gives her. I really love that. And actually she said in this one, I said, well, do you want me to dedicate this one to you as well? And she said, no, you've got to name a character after me. So there's a character called Zalise in there. Originally, the kidnap victim, the first draft, that's what it was. And then I showed my wife and she said, no, you absolutely not. And so I changed the name. And then, so now there's a character in a couple of chapters called Zalise. And that was because I had to name.
Fit her in.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand over to questions from the audience in a minute. I've got a couple more questions of my own for Christian, but then we will have a roving mic moving around, so please wait for the mic to come to you. I call this my Mark Brandy question because this is one that he's sprung on me at a launch, and what I want to know is if you could name one thing that you wanted readers to take away from having read The Long Night, what would it be?
That's the Mark Brandy.
Completely stumped me too.
Yeah, I think 2 things. One is sort of probably obvious, and the other one might be really small. So I think the broad thing is just kind of deal with things, and people make really, really terrible mistakes, but you just kind of need to forgive yourself. Easier said than done, But I think that, this idea, I think this whole thing, the whole story could have been kind of not solved, but it could have been addressed if the characters just kind of forgave themselves for things. And the other thing is this really personal thing where it just touches on. There's a little bit, without spoilers, there's a little bit of dips into the world of foster parents and things like that. And that's a world I feel really strongly about, and I think that I kind of like the idea of people maybe just starting to think about that world, and you don't have to foster a kid, but just start thinking about it from all the different perspectives, and But that is a good question.
Yeah. You have an established and devoted audience. I've checked Goodreads. They're there.
I can't look at it, just in case.
And they have expectations of what a Christian White novel will involve, and there are certain tropes of thrillers. As you write more books, I want to know whether you find that restricting in any way because of the expectation of what a Christian White book will deliver.
Every time I feel it, at an early stage, I feel that pressure, and I feel that. I got to have a twist, and I got to do this and that. But then inevitably, I kind of just end up shutting that voice out, because you kind of have to, and you just get lost in the story and hope you kind of get there, and hope what drew those readers to you in the first place is still there. But where it was really, really hard was my second book, The Wife and the Widow. That was the book I really felt that pressure. I'd get emails from people, and beautiful, wonderful emails, so nice, and they would always end with saying, "Can't wait to read your next book." And I thank God I didn't do this, but I felt like writing back saying, "Well, this one was probably a fluke. The next one's going to be terrible." That was a really, really tough thing to get over, and I'm not sure how I did. I actually think I did. And I've told this story before, and hopefully you're not hearing it for the second time. But I kind of changed my focus. So I think I got over that hump in this really weird way, where I was like I said, I was getting all these really lovely emails, like you do, which is great, and then you get one bad one, and you really focus on that, you know. So every now and then I'll get a bad one. Sometimes I'll get one that says, you've got a lemon tree in this scene, and technically that's a tropical tree. It wouldn't have survived climate, so it wouldn't have got to that big, that sort of stuff. And I can relate to that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'll try harder in the lemon trees and stuff. But then every now and then you get these nasty ones, and so I don't look at Goodreads anymore. Although I've got a few. Now my wife will only share the bad ones if they're funny. Yeah, there was one the other day that said it was like 2 stars, and it was just one word. It was meh. just MEH. Like for some reason they felt so unmoved, moved enough to write it, but not moved enough to say it. Yeah. So I get those, and my dad always tells me the percentage, and he's always you're 4 point this, but I don't check it. But when they email it, come to you, it's hard to avoid. Yeah. And I got this email I was in this really stressed. I'd achieved my dream, but all of a sudden I had a deadline and an audience, which was, oh my God, what do I do? And I was in this stressed, fragile place, and I got this email from this nasty woman, and she took me to task for 2 things. One of them, she had a point. So she didn't like all the swearing, which at the time I thought, oh, bullshit, you'll have to bleep that in the recording, sorry. But just recently I saw, you looking at your kids, you see yourself reflected back. My daughter just recently, she died on Zelda. She was playing Zelda and she died, and she said, shit, fuck, like that. And I was like, oh my God, that's definitely, okay. So she had a point about the swearing. But the other thing she hated, this is a quote, was the gayness, right? So in my first book, it's set in 1990s Kentucky, very complex religious town. And there was this relationship between 2 men. And it was this very well-worded email, but really gross in all the ways you can expect. And it really got to me because I was just already in a really fragile place, and I emailed her back, and I thought, I sent it off, and then I was still itchy. And then all of a sudden I thought, oh, I've got a power. I can create a character and name it after this woman. And then then the blockage, the pressure I felt cleared, and then I thought, okay, I'll do that. And suddenly I was focusing on it, and I thought, I'll do that, and I'll just make her a nasty woman, and she's in it for a scene. But then I thought, oh no, I can go further with this. I can make her a lesbian. She would hate it so much, So I did. So I created this whole character, and then as like we said, your characters start taking on a life of their own, and all of a sudden I kind of fell in love with this character. I loved her, and suddenly she had a really cool wife, and she was really funny, and she was really good at her job, and then I was just really focusing on that to be funny, and then all of a sudden the book was out, and then people would come up to me and say, oh, I love that character, you should write a series about her. And I would say, yeah, maybe I'll write a series. And I actually brought her back for The Ledge. She's my first recurring character, yeah. But that weirdly knocked me out of my sort of funk, and I thought, hang on, what am I doing? God, just use your power and lean into it. But no, I do always feel, to get back, I've drifted so far away from your question, right. but to get back to your question, yes, I do feel that pressure, but it's getting easier and easier to. And actually, all my books are so different, and this one's much more scary than all my other books. And the response is good. I try to give like 60-70% familiar, and then the rest new. And I think that's a really good. That seems to be a good equation. Yeah.
We're at the point in the evening where we're going to take questions from the audience. So, as I said, we do have a roving mic coming around. So if you could just put your hand up, and we will get a microphone to you. So maybe up here first.
It's always a relief to see some hands come up. It's
thank God.
Oh, thank God.
So you've talked a little bit about like the drafting process you go through. I was kind of wondering what you do as far as like research to get like the realistic like landscapes, for example, and characters and things like that.
Yeah, I do a lot of research. In this book in particular, I did a lot because one of the characters is an artist. She's a painter, and I know what moves me. What art, and I usually move through galleries. It drives my wife crazy because I just go through like this, and then and then I'm done. But I'll stop on a couple will grab me, and they're the ones I sit and stare at. But I had no idea the colours they use and how they do it and all of that sort of stuff. So I did a lot of research on that. And there's always... often I've done the research before in this weird way, and I can call it research, but at the time it's just procrastination. So I will look up, with my first book, there was a whole bit about it. It was about Pentecostal snake handling, which is this thing where people handle venomous snakes to worship God. I didn't do it, but I was interested in it, And then Satanic Panic was in my third book, and all of these things that I was really into, and so I kind of had already done the research without knowing it's research. But I always do a lot of research, and landscapes, things like that. But then the trick is, I find with research is you get really into, you're researching something and you get so specific and so into it that you want to put everything you learn on the page. And so it becomes about, hey, just cutting it out. And, in this book, Em is really into horror movies, and that in the original draft she wasn't, but I just wanted to give her something extra. I actually think it might have been an editor's idea. I can't remember, but then and that was just me. That was she's trying to write a horror script. That was a script I wrote when I was her age that she describes, and I was so. I have such an intimate knowledge of that world, and then the trick was not putting too much in. I had this right in the middle of this super tense sequence. I had this weird, about a page and a half, 2 pages, where Em thinks something reminds her of a scene from The Exorcist, but it wasn't a scene that was in the original theatrical release. It was as a DVD extra, and then when they re-released it for the anniversary, they put that scene back in. That is as boring as it sounds. I know to everyone else that's really boring. That's like, oh, that's really interesting. And so I had this big digression, and then my editor said, what, you're right in the middle of the most tense scene. No one cares about this. And that was just an example of me remembering, oh, that's right, that's not interesting to anyone else. So it's just about cutting out. So I think I always try to over-research, but then don't put too much in, I think that's a tricky balance.
Hi, Christian. I love your books.
Thank you.
I'm an audiobook listener, so I've listened to some of the ones that are only available on Audible, and you've co-written with your wife. Can you tell me a little bit about that process, please? Yeah, absolutely. So I've written 4 Audible novellas, which eventually will come out in as books. We're just resisting it for some reason. The first one I wrote by myself, and then they said, do you want to do another one? And I was sort of busy, and my wife is such a brilliant writer, and then I eventually said, what if we did it together? And Audible was great, and then I had to convince my wife to do it. And so we did 3 together. The first one was hell. It was horrible. We had this big argument right in the middle. It was all my fault because I would just go in and I would just cut big chunks without showing my workings, and then she would, and then you're having this kind of discussion about the story, and then it spills into relationship. It was just the worst. I'm shocked that it didn't result in a divorce. I'm really... and in the middle of it, we said, let's never, ever do this again. This was a terrible idea. But then the book came out, and I can never listen to my audiobooks for some reason. I mean, they've got great narrators. I always listen to the first little bit, but I can't... I just want to rewrite things. I can't enjoy it. I can't get into them. But then with these novellas, that first one, it came out, and they're short. It was 3 or 4 hours, and we just split a bottle of wine and we listened to it together, and it was such a joyous experience that we buried all the trauma of writing it. And then they said, do you want to do another one? And they said, do you want to do another 3? And we said, no, we'll do 1 and see what happens. And that one we treated very differently. We plotted it together so much more, and we were much more... I showed my workings and kind of I just let her do more of it. But the second one was called The Call, and it came from this... and this will give you an insight into her very, very twisted mind. We were gardening one day, and she said, what if someone called the house and they said, we'll give you $1 million if you let us bury a body on your property. You won't know where it is. You'll be out when it happens. You won't know anything. You'll have the money. That's it. And it started this great conversation. And then when they said, do you want to do a book? We thought, oh, that's the book. It's this couple, this really lovely couple, but they've got
they're just in financial, they don't have they're in their 50s and they just don't have the money they thought they would have, and then they get this offer. It's not $1 million, but it's a little less. And of course they take it in the book, and then as soon as it's all done, there's a news bulletin, which is this local woman's gone missing, and they start to think, oh my God, was it her? And it all snowballs. And that was all from her brain. And that was a much better process because we just really, it was more of a partnership, I guess. And then we did another one. The most recent one is called Unfollowed, and it's all set in Bali, because if you write a book set in Bali, you can claim all your Bali trip on tax. So it's amazing. But it's about this little kid that goes missing from a kids club at a resort, and that was super, super fun to write. And again, that was much more of more and more of her. And I think and now we've said we're not going to do any more together, at least for a while, because I think it's time for her to. She hasn't needed me for a couple of books, So I think the next thing to do is bring out a book, and then I think maybe we'll bring them out in text, because I have a lot of people say, I want to read it, but I don't listen to audiobooks. So I think that will be the thing. But yeah, I think she's working on her own book at the minute, and it's just annoyingly good. Really, really, really good so far. But yeah, it was a joy mostly.
Have any other questions? Okay, one from up here and then over the side here.
Oh, thanks. So I recently went to an author talk with Luke Johnson, and he was talking about a firm press and the editing process. He paid you a couple of very nice compliments.
Oh, that's nice.
He was talking about how he felt that he didn't really have a lot of control over what he, in terms of putting his foot down, I want to keep that scene. His editor said to him essentially, well, if you really feel strongly about that scene, you can keep it in, but if the book is not going to sell well, then you're not going to get a second chance. So do you feel now that you are more established, that you've got a bit more control over what you can put your foot down about? Or
I think that I think the more books you come out, and if they're a success, you do get a bit more of that. But I'm really, really nervous about that, because I think editors are there to make you seem like the best writer you can be. They bring with my first book, my editor Ruby, she I won't say it because it's a spoiler, but she came up with this idea. It's a page and a half, but it completely explains one of the characters' motivations, and it's so profound that you would think, oh, that must have been there from the beginning, and it wasn't. It was her. They bring these really good things, but there are times where you connect to something for whatever reason, and you do need to put your foot down and you need to fight that battle. But I'm really, really nervous about that, because sometimes you get better at realizing when, is it just because you think this is a really beautifully written scene? That's not enough. It needs to earn, for me, every scene needs to propel the plot from A to B, and also the character from A to B, and also just have some sort of shift in the balance of power, which you wouldn't have even seen. This is my weird brain. I see it as a seesaw. It needs that movement. And if it doesn't have that, then usually I will cut it. So I do pick my battles. And there was I think one or two things in this latest book that they said, oh, I would do something different. And sometimes when you're formulating an argument, you realise, I don't have a good reason to defend this. But what happened with these two things, I realised, oh, that's why it's there. And what that does is it makes it earn its place, but it also, often people aren't pointing to, they give you a note about a thing, and the more you think about it, they're actually pointing to somewhere else. So sometimes it's they give you a problem and they offer a solution, and that solution's not right, but there must be a problem for them to have said that. So what and I've got to be vague because there's spoilers, but what I did in that instance, and I do this often, is think, no, I'm keeping this, but I'll earn it. So I'll go back and I'll create a stone in this pond so the ripples reach this place and make it earn, So I think it's this weird, I'm really worried about being under-edited. Sometimes I think you get one of these drafts I got back, and there wasn't enough notes, and I was thinking, oh no, you can be mean to me. Don't pull your punches. So I think that it's all about finding that balance, and I think you do. you get more confidence, but for me, I'm just getting better at figuring out when to listen and when to kind of, and if that makes sense. Yeah.
I think we had one more up the back there, and that might be our last one.
Christian, you made us wait so long for the ledge and only a year for the long night. How long do we have to wait for the next one?
I think by 2035. No, the next one is... I waited way too long to do the ledge. I was doing film and TV stuff. I waited way too long. This one I really wanted to bring out sooner because I'm going to be doing probably on a bit of a big TV show in 2026. So I'm delivering the manuscript in 2026, but I probably won't be until 2027, I don't think. So I think right now they're scheduled for 2027 and 2029, which seems like a million years away, but I just need a little bit more time just to manage all my other stuff. But you never know if it's in and it's perfect. It's due in August, so I'll probably start it in July or something. I'm in deep into it. And it's actually funny. Do you find this too? When often you'll be promoting a book, and you're talking about the book, but you're busy writing the next one, so your head's in. I often forget the characters' names in this book, and I'm thinking about. Not quite as long with the ledge. I think that was 3 years or something. But this one it'll be 2 years. Yeah. Sorry, everyone.
Christian, thank you so much for such an entertaining, interesting
Thank you.
conversation. Just to speak so freely about your process and that incredible journey that you've been on, which has been 8 years or so, and I'm sure it's going to go a lot further from here. So can you please thank Christian White?
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Pleasure. We also have Torquay Books here tonight. Lynn over here selling copies of obviously The Long Night and some of other Christian's titles as well. And of course you can borrow it from the library as well. And Christian will be signing books over here at the signing table after you've purchased them. So there first and then over here. So thanks very much for coming along tonight. We really appreciate it.